Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
perfect. Hi everyone, my name is Mohammed Sidki. I'm the AIA San Mateo County Chapter President. I want to welcome you all to our first career building workshop for the year. We are very excited to have this as a joint event between AIA San Mateo County and AIA Silicon Valley Women in Architecture Committee. Today we'll have 4 panelists. So we have Mani Farhadi, Nilüfer Green, Erin Pavitt, and Stephanie Silkwood. And they will be discussing 4 important topics, that is resume review, portfolio critique, interview skills, and networking tips. Before we start, I would like to make a few chapter announcements. So on May 26, we will have Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion conversation with Brian Tips of Moody Nolan, the largest African-American owned and managed firm in the country and the recipient of the 2021 AIA National Architecture Firm Award. So that's on May 26, and this is for AIA San Mateo County. On June 2nd, we'll have a virtual tour for Kaiser Permanente new specialty medical office building in Redwood City. Now I will like to introduce my co-host and friend, Dasha Ortenberg, chair of AIA Silicon Valley Women's in Architecture Committee, to introduce her committee. Dasha?
Thank you, Mohammed, for the introduction. We are really pleased to host this event in partnership with you. Thank you so much for organizing this and hosting it. The Women in Architecture Committee of the AIA Silicon Valley was established to stimulate women's growth in the profession through sustained activities that provide mentorship and networking opportunities that enable women in architecture to reach their full potential. It has grown into a broader inclusion organization or group, and we work closely with the AIA Silicon Valley to put on events that, that address intersectional identities and host many people to speaking to many topics. If you could go to the next slide, please. Some of our events have included collaborations with NOMA, integration of conversations about confidence, thinking about how to advocate for oneself and for others, larger conferences, considerations for promoting communities and equity in the built environment, and events talking about books and literature and films that address questions of equity and empowerment in our profession. We support our own members in facilitating, creating, and speaking at these events, and we also host people from around the country in talking about their professions and their careers and practices. So if you're interested in learning more about our events, please visit our website and sign up for our mailing list to learn more. You can also see our events posted on the AIA Silicon Valley website when they are ready for sign up. So please keep track of us and join more of our events. Some of our events that are coming up are further intersections events. So you can see a couple of the events that we've had in the past few months at the bottom right of the screen. We are doing these in collaboration with the community colleges of the Bay Area. And we are also looking to host further events supporting people of different backgrounds. We have an event in the works for June that will be announced shortly on our website. So Mohammed, I think we can actually skip the next slide if you want to launch straight into our next content.
Okay, thank you, Dasha.
Thank you.
So session format, the first 30 minutes we'll have a panel discussion. Each panelist will present for 8 minutes. Now, during the presentation, please introduce yourself by adding your name, your city, what university you are graduating from or have graduated from, or who's your current employer maybe. So this will be the first part. The second part will have 40 minutes workshop. So we'll divide the group into four breakout rooms. Each presenter will stay for 10 minutes in each breakout room before the next presenter move in. And last, as I mentioned when we started, this session is being recorded. Now we are only recording the panel discussion, the first 30 minutes. When we reach the workshops, we will stop the recording so you can be more comfortable sharing your camera, your video, opening your mic and asking questions. So we'll go right into our panelists. So we'll start with Stephanie Silkwood, Associate Principal at RMW. So Stephanie is an Associate Principal at RMW Architecture and Interiors in San Jose, California. She combines a deep interest in design and sustainability with a remarkable ability to advocate for her clients through rigorous project management. A born collaborator, Stephanie is happiest when a large complex project unifies her team to meet a challenge. For Stephanie, building synergy within a team means bringing out the best in each individual to uncover the smartest solutions, which in turn delivers the most successful outcome for her clients. Stephanie is an advocate for the advancement of the architecture profession and has been repeatedly recognized for leadership excellence by the AIA. In 2016, Stephanie was the recipient of the AIA National Young Architect Award. Stephanie, stage is yours.
Thank you. I didn't know you're going to read that whole thing. I was going to keep it brief. But I'm so as Mohammed mentioned, I'm an associate principal at RMW. I'm the managing principal for our San Jose studio. So I do participate in all our hiring for the San Jose office. So I have, even though I'm only been a principal for a year and a half now at RMW, I've reviewed a lot of resumes and hired quite a few people, but by no means am I an expert at resumes. So what I want to share with you today is my observations and what catches my attention. As you can imagine, and maybe have already done so, you can go and do a Google search to get all kinds of tips and tricks for resumes, which I do highly recommend. But I think it's kind of nice to talk about, you know, our industry specifically, what people are looking for, what kind of trends you see in resumes. And I wanted to start off by just emphasizing how important it is to make an impression with your resume. We're a design profession. We are about presenting oneself and making a pitch. And if you can't start off with a great resume, you're starting off on the wrong foot. So if you can go to the next slide, Mohammed, here's what I feel are the components of a great resume. And I'm sharing a resume here that came from a candidate that we hired. I've changed the name and details so you can't tell who this person is, but they did give me permission to share their resume and highlight some of the things that I appreciate about it. And not to say that this is the way you should structure your resume, but I want to highlight the things that catch my attention, because when I look at a resume, if it appears visually disorganized, it's a turnoff, and I might spend 20 seconds looking at a resume and decide I'm not going to hire somebody. So it's really important to make a statement from the get-go and make sure, these are my tips, that it's clear and legible, showing off who you are. So I'll break this down and unpack it a little bit as we go on to the next couple of slides. But a few things that are really important to me is that it's concise, but it's also specific. So there's a particular balance. Some people prefer to keep their resume to one page, but if there's enough good content that you feel you need to spill onto a second page, that's certainly okay. But then you don't want to get to a point where you feel like you have to fill up that second page with stuff that's maybe not very important. Another important thing is to cater your resume to the role that you're pursuing. Not all firms are alike. So if you're pursuing an example is if you're pursuing a firm that does a lot of retail or some very specific type of design, you want to make sure that your resume highlights things that will be specific to that role. I also like when I see, this resume doesn't have it, but I like when I see an objective at the top that says I'm applying for this position for this firm, and it lets you know that this resume was made specifically for you. And then also, we'll talk a little bit about coordinating with your cover letter, portfolio, and your reference list. And Erin, who will talk about the portfolio, also will cover some tips for that section also. So next slide, I'm going to break this down a little bit and tell you some things that I like. So this individual took the time to come up with a little bit of a personal brand and a logo that just kind of highlights who they are. I see some resumes that have way too many graphics. So for me, this kind of clean, simple, but nice design is eye-catching and intrigues me enough that I want to read through the remainder of the resume. Next. It's important to have your contact info and make sure it's correct. It has so happened that sometimes it's not correct, which is crazy to me. If you happen to have your portfolio online, go ahead and provide a link. Some people provide their portfolio in a PDF format, and often they'll put it into one combined PDF. That's also nice because you can just kind of scroll through everything. Next slide. Highlighting your education, but also any credentials. If you're pursuing a certain credential, or if you've achieved something like a minor in school, make sure that's included here. And GPA, put it on there if it's impressive. If it's not, just go ahead and leave it off. Next. When you get to describing your past employment, if you've had any, I know some of you maybe haven't had a lot of employment experience, but using action verbs to describe your accomplishments, and not just tasks, but accomplishments. I mean, if you can say something like the word transformed, that obviously implies that a lot more than I did this. To know that a candidate has taken the initiative to champion something is stuff that you want to be able to pick out of these action words that are provided. Scrolling down on the resume, I really liked how this candidate highlighted some awards, even though I didn't necessarily know how important all these things were. It just suggests that this person is getting recognized outside of their day-to-day education or employment. And then personal interests. I really like to get a sense of who this person is. Do they have aspirations outside of work? It's like, oh, this person likes marathon training. I'm really intrigued, right? So yoga, cooking, crocheting, it just gives you a little sense of intrigue about this person, and you want to meet them and talk to them and get to know more about them. The skills evaluation, I think, is important. Some people like to just provide a list. Some people like to do this graphic scale. I don't mind the graphic scale as long as it's not too busy. I've seen some people put this kind of graphic scale and it's got all these icons and colors, and it is overbearing. So I really liked the way this was presented in a very clean, simple, muted way, but it's still a visual that's interesting. And make sure you're prepared to provide references, and that your references are expecting a phone call and are willing to say nice things about you. Any employer who does it right will call all your references and ask very specific questions. And I also would recommend that you don't list your references on your resume, because you want to protect their privacy and only provide their contact information to folks who specifically ask for it. So I've come up with a few things also that when I read these, I consider them deal breakers, because for somebody to put something in your hand for consideration that has any of these errors, it just doesn't bode well. And so spelling and grammatical errors, You know, one or two here and there, it happens, especially people where English isn't the first language. It's understandable. But the point is that you should proofread your resume. Get somebody else to look at it, you know, get a dozen people to look at it. There's really no excuse for not spending the time to make sure that these things are correct. To the right, poor resume composition. You know, I showed you one that was pretty clean, visually attractive. Sometimes they're just too busy. And I'm really particular about fonts. And so it's really important that you think about what kind of font you're going to use, because some fonts, they look really cool. But then when you try to go read them, it's challenging, and it ends up just being too distracting. So you want to pick something that's just kind of a nice balance of unique but legible. Other things you should not do. Do not put the wrong firm name on your resume or your cover letter. I've seen it happen, or in the email that you send. You know, I got an email from a candidate that said, "I'm really interested in working for AP&I." So, well, I'm from RMW, so good luck. And actually, we gave him a break, but still. Another thing I look for is short employment durations. If you are somebody who has worked at a firm for a year and a half, and then you move on, and then you're there for, you know, another 8 months, and then you move on, it's going to draw questions. It's not necessarily a deal breaker, especially during a pandemic, or having, you know, I've seen a lot of resumes where during the Great Recession, I've seen people's employment history is a little scattered, and that's understandable. And then another one is a negative review from your references. And people do talk. They're usually, when you give them a call, they're not shy about saying, you know, I wouldn't hire that person. So if make sure you ask the right people for references, and don't assume that they're going to say nice things about you if you don't have a great relationship with them. And then last but not least, poorly written cover letter. And if you can go to the next slide, I just want to emphasize, to me, a cover letter is as important as your resume. I feel like a lot of people overlook the cover letter, and they might just provide something kind of quick, or it's a form letter. But I think this is a really good opportunity to present yourself in a written narrative that's totally different from the resume. And I like to see specific things, and I've given some examples here on the right side where you talk about how you connect with the firm, and what makes you unique, what are your passions and your interpersonal skills. So if you look at some of these examples I've provided, you know, I like it when people talk about, well, I've gone on your resume and I've done this research, or I've talked to so-and-so, and I really like what I've heard about your culture, and here's why I think I would be a good fit. Or here's, you know, my project's interests aligns with your project interests, or my experience aligns with your project types. And then lastly, you know, talk about your aspirations. I really want to work, I really want to learn to be a project manager, or I'm really excited about getting licensed, and I've already done this, and that. And I think all these things really help make you stand out. And so it's important, and I know Aaron will talk about this a little bit also when he comes up next, about how you stitch all this stuff together to really demonstrate who you are and kind of brand yourself and catch attention. Next slide. And I'm going to reiterate the fonts. Make sure you don't send me a resume with Comic Sans on it, because it'll go right in the trash pile. So think about it, and try to stand out, but try to balance, you know, keeping things clean and simple and concise. I know that was a lot, and I talked really quickly, so I think I stayed within the 8 minutes, and I'll hand it over to Aaron next.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. So yeah, next we'll have Aaron Pavitt, architect at Heather Young Architects. So Aaron has been working with Heather Young Architects for 6 years. after moving from Chicago in 2015. During his time in the office, he has progressed from designer to architect too, and works on a wide variety of projects from high-end single-family and multifamily housing to tenant improvements and new commercial office buildings. His role within the office has expanded and worked closely with the firm partner to help recruit, review, and interview potential hires across all positions. Aaron?
All right. Well, thank you very much, Mohammed. So yeah, today I'm going to talk about portfolios. Obviously, very, very large topic, something that keeps people up late at night thinking about trying how to understand what this beast of a thing is, because lots of times you'll run into portfolios and they can quickly stretch out to, you know, the 50, 60, 70 pages. So trying to get a little handle of what you should be focusing on. The objective of a portfolio, of course, is to clearly present your qualifications through your work. It's not simply just a scatter of just, here's my work, this is what I've done, this is, you know, what I've been focusing on for the past 4 to 6 years in my educational realm. It's really kind of showing to a potential employer why you're qualified for this position and what makes you a good candidate for this job. The areas we're going to focus on today are organization, design, qualifications, and your individuality. So jumping to the next slide. So your organization, organizing your portfolio is not simply just let's go with a chronological order of my projects, right? It's not necessarily, okay, here's my recent portfolio project or my recent studio project, and then running back down through time. You really want to focus yourself on what is the most pertinent and what's the most or your best project for the position you're applying for. If you're looking at a firm that's doing primarily single family housing, potentially, you know, your 150 to 200,000 square foot commercial office building project might not be the one you want to start with. So you really want to focus yourself and look into what you're working in and what you're focusing to do, and have your actual projects in the order target that job. As Stephanie was kind of saying before too, this idea of this concept throughout your resume, cover letter, and portfolio is actually really critical as well. We want to see that you have an understanding of not only design through an architectural understanding, but also just the design in your kind of everyday life. We want to know that you have the ability to take 3 separate elements of what we're trying to put together for you to qualify for a job and tie those things together. So one consistent theme. Again, great fonts, stick with that font throughout all 3 of those mechanisms and the other medias that you use to present yourself to the potential employers. Make sure that the design is the same. If you're hitting with a certain color theme, stick with that color theme throughout. Layout, patterns, things like that. Just kind of keep everything together. We want to know that you know how to pull all of this work together. Again, on the hierarchy, you know, target the position. Every position is different, and although you're coming in most likely from an educational realm and might not have a lot of experience, potentially some internship experience, focus that work towards the projects that are the jobs that you want to be making. And then creating the 2 portfolios is kind of more, your portfolio should be a living document at all times. You should be able to reorganize the sheets, and most of us are probably working in the design to put their portfolios together, but you should be able to reorganize those projects because potentially different firms might have different ideas or different focuses, and you might want to change that up. But the other big thing that you want to focus on are work samples. And work samples are typically a 1-sheet kind of full on your one project. And it really focuses on the overall. It kind of takes you from that first conceptual design through to the idea and then the final copy. And what that does is just easy for everybody to send out. Lots of times the requirements for websites or people when you're sending in your information is like 10 megabytes. Really hard to compress down a 40-page portfolio to 10 megabytes. And these are also, when you're getting back into interviewing, especially in person, hopefully shortly in the near future, this is a great thing to leave. You're going to leave this copy with the potential employers, your resume, cover letter, and these work samples. And it's a great thing to do. That's a lot less expensive than leaving one of your expensive portfolios. All right, next one. The design. There is no one way to do a portfolio, and your portfolio is really one of your biggest and your first ways to express yourself to a potential employer. And I'm not going to sit here and say, there's only one way to do it. This is the way you lay it out. This is what it's supposed to look like. Everyone has a unique idea, but I think one of the big things that you need to do is just choose one way to go. You want to keep your layouts to a minimum. You don't want to have, every single project have completely different layouts with no consistency consistency throughout the portfolio. We want to see this document as one living document of a bunch of different projects that have come through numbers of years in your life. Whether they are studio projects, whether you've been working for a few years and potentially you're making that jump, it's still relevant from that area to this area as well. But we want to make sure that you can kind of understand how to take all of those projects and use it as a nice clean format throughout. And that kind of makes it a little bit cleaner for us and a little easier for us to understand where you're coming from, and shows that you have that organizational skill that we're looking for. Knowing your work is also a big thing. I can't tell you how many times we run into people where we ask them questions about their portfolio or about a design, and they can't really come up with an answer about it. Do not put anything in your portfolio, please, that you do not understand or you do not know how you got to that decision. Lots of times we're working with group projects, and that's completely understandable. You cannot be responsible for every single phase and every single thing that happens in your project, but have a good understanding of what's happening and just make sure that the things that we're going to ask you about, you have a good answer for. So think about your project and also know the work you're going to be coming into for. And it is, again, you're telling a story, so focus on the overall concept of the design and then break slowly into how you got to the final concept of design, and then potentially some other graphics, sketches, details, things like that that help tell you the overall story. And again, never be afraid of white space. A lot of people we don't want to see, portfolios, as kind of Stephanie was alluding to before, with keeping things clean. We don't want just a scatter plot of images all over a sheet with overlapping and things. Keeping that hierarchy on the page is very important. And next one. Qualifications. You're proving to the employer that you are qualified for the position. And that is challenging coming out of school without a lot of experience, but you do want to focus on the position you're applying for. Review a few different firms. Look at what they're putting on their website to say they're looking for the role and the responsibilities within the role that you're applying for. It's good to get an understanding of a collective of the industry as a whole, as what they're looking for in, a designer role or an ARC1 role or a job captain role. Know what that is and kind of help tailor yourself a little bit towards it. If you're looking at maybe even just being a drafter, then focusing on some more of your drafting elements, your details, your sections, your elevations, things that are focused towards that job can really help you stand out a little bit and let us know, hey, this person has experience or at least has a great knowledge base of the fundamentals of how this works. And show a variety of imagery. We love to see the sketches, the conceptual of how you got to something or your understanding of, what that overall idea might have been. And then we can see at the final rendered image how you got there and what that might have looked like. Again, plans to get the overall understanding of what the project is. Sections, details, we love to see details. There is a big difference between a lot of the conceptual things that we do in architectural school that is very different to the realities of what we're working with on everyday projects. So it's really nice to know that you can take that conceptual idea and bring it into something in the norms of reality, and you understand how big buildings kind of come together and your projects are going to come together, because there is a large and steep learning curve from school to actual work, and it's really helpful for us to know, hey, this person might not need quite as much of that helping hand. And then if you do have internship work, if you're directly involved in something, feel free to show that. Obviously, if it's a large project, you show the overall what you were working towards, but really tailor to the things that you were focusing on and that you worked on. So we know that within a large firm in an internship, most likely you might have a limited role, but it's always good to show it if you got things that are relevant to the job you're applying to. And last one is your individuality. Of course, this is you. This is you on a sheet. This is the work that you've been putting together, and you've worked really hard for this work in your educational realm, and you want to show the employer who you are. So have some fun with it is a big thing too. You've got to design everything. In our profession, it is one of those little curses and blessings at the same time, where everything we do has a little bit of a higher expectation. So when if you are sending out thank you letters after interviews, or you're even doing your own little business cards, everything that you do should be designed, it should be focused on. And especially with your portfolio, again, make sure that you made the little details and you really tightened everything up, you know, what you're working on. Again, show your work, highlight the work that you've done within a group. Obviously, there's a lot of things that you're working on in tandem with other people, but be transparent about your role within the group and what did you work on and what did you actually fight for within the group is always a big thing. If there's an element that you're particularly proud of a project, really highlight that and talk about why that project or that element in the project was important to you. And then again, also looking at, you know, outside of just architectural projects, includes some non-architectural stuff. We love to see watercolors, sketches, you know, other things that you're interested in that also work within the same realm of design and architecture. It just helps us to get a little bit better of an understanding of who you are as a person and a potential applicant for a job. And that's all I got, but look forward to the breakout sessions and thank you.
Thank you so much, Aaron. Thank you. Next, we'll have Nilofer Green, Head of People, Operations, and Talent at DES Architects and Engineers. So as the Head of People, Operations, and Talent, Nilofer has a passion for aligning business strategy with people strategy and helping people build amazing careers. She is a strategic business partner who has extensive experience leading work teams to improve processes and organizational efficiencies. With a keen focus on overall company strategy and implementing state-of-the-art staffing practices, she is a driving factor in helping organizations flourish and mature. Nilofer's experience ranges from multiple high-tech startups to large tech companies throughout the Silicon Valley. Nilofer?
Thanks, Mohammed. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about interviewing today. So all of your hard work has paid off and you've landed the interview. Yay! Great news. Now what? Don't panic. Let me talk you through a little bit about how to ace an interview. We'll go through the basics here. So first off, try your best to know what you want. I know it's hard when you're first coming out of school and you're graduating, but think about things like what type and size firm do you want to work in? Do you think you might be more comfortable in a small boutique type of firm or a big international firm? What type of company culture might suit you? A good way to tell what the company culture is like is just by actually attending an interview, even a virtual interview. You can see how people interact with one another. You can see how they engage. Are they more formal? Are they a little more casual? Those kinds of things will give you a good clue as to what the company culture is like. Also, as we've talked about before, what type of projects excite you? So really be able to articulate where your interest lies. And then also a great thing, I love it when people come to me and talk about someone that they know or they went to school with or they've worked with or done projects with, or they even just shoot me a quick email or a chat just saying, hey, you know, I have a great candidate for this position. And people love to help others. So if you have any contacts within the company, that definitely helps just to kind of give you a bit of a leg up. Next slide. So as in anything, preparation equals success, right? So once you get that call for the interview, you're really excited and then you go, okay, now I have all this work to do to prepare. Simple things you can do to prepare. Of course, look at the company's website. Be familiar with what the company's all about. The website will just give you a full overall picture from the type of projects, company culture, benefits. I mean, it'll cover everything. So spend some time, dig in and see what you like, what you can bring back into the interview when you talk about it. So you can say, yes, I have done my homework. I have looked at the website. Boy, I really liked this or that. Those kinds of things show that you've been prepared. Also, as we mentioned before, how you match the requirements. So be able to articulate, and I know it's hard sometimes if you're coming out of school, but be able to articulate how you feel you will match up with this company's position. Know the locations, where the headquarters is of the company. Are they doing virtual? Is this a remote job? Those kinds of things. Know what they're looking for to be successful in the role. And then also a great place to look if you're not familiar with Glassdoor. It's a website where it kind of gives company reviews, people who've worked there, people who've interviewed there. They have even an interview section. You know, was the interview hard? How long was the process? All these kinds of things. So Glassdoor will give you a lot of information, and it's just like anything when you see a review of a product or, you know, any kind of a review online, take it with a grain of salt. Sometimes people, you know, reviews are overly awesome, and then sometimes they're a little bit not so good. So But it gives you a good picture and lets you prepare for your interview. Next slide. So also important is knowing your audience. Who will you be meeting? So the person that you talk with who will be setting up your interview, you can ask them. Don't be shy. Say, hey, how many people will I meet with? Who will I meet with? And take down their names and then go ahead and research them. Most everybody's on LinkedIn or on the company website. You should be able to find out something about each person, hopefully, so that you can make those connections. Perhaps maybe you went to the same school, you graduated from the same school, or worked on the similar projects together. And then also it's helpful to know how much time you have, because you want to spend time focusing on certain things. And if you only have 15 minutes with one person, but you have an hour-long slot, you may want to use that time very wisely. So you can ask the person, typically someone in HR who's setting up your interview, ask them those questions, and those are good questions to know. Of course, is it a virtual, a phone, or an in-person interview? Really important these days to know that as well. And we'll get into that a little bit more. Next slide. So be ready to talk about yourself. Who are you? Hard question. Takes some preparation. It takes some practice. I always try to tell people, don't worry, we're all nervous. Even people conducting interviews sometimes are nervous. So you're not alone. And we do take that into account, and, we take it with a grain of salt. So just be yourself. And a question that you should be prepared to talk about is, tell me about yourself. That can be anything from, like Stephanie was saying, some of your interests and hobbies, to work experience, internships, class projects. What excites you? What do you want to do? What kind of projects have you worked on, or class group things that kind of like lit a fire under you and said, hey, I really like this, it excited me. Why might you want to work at that company? That's a good question that people ask all the time, and people sort of are stumped and kind of like deer in the headlights. So be able to answer that as well. Some bonus things that you should be able to talk about, I think, are trends in architecture and design. Who in the community do you follow? What do you admire about their architecture ability or their style? And then also be able to talk about your availability to start and any constraints you have. So you shouldn't be really actively interviewing until close to when you're ready to work. If it's 6 months off or something, I would say that that's a little bit too early. If it's maybe 1 to 2 months delay, that still may be, depending on the need, early. But try to start your interview process just before you're ready to begin. Next slide. All right, as Erin talked a lot about the portfolios. So being able to discuss your portfolio and rehearse the presentation of it, I think, is an important part of your interview. You want to make sure your portfolio focuses on the right types of projects for that company that was discussed before, and be able to tell the story of the projects, kind of paint a visual picture of the process you went through. What were the thoughts when you were doing this design? Explain the concepts behind them, why you selected these projects to include in your portfolio, and what software, how you created things. All important things to be able to articulate. Next slide. And interviewing is a two-way street, don't forget. So ask them questions. Typically at the end of an interview, someone will say, do you have any questions for me? When someone says no, I get disappointed. So I feel like, we couldn't have possibly covered everything. So you have to have some questions in your pocket. And a lot of times some of them will already be answered in discussion. But, you can ask people things like, tell me what, describe the company culture. You'll get all kinds of answers. You can ask every person you meet that same question. And it's very interesting. You'll find consistencies, hopefully. But, you never know. It's personal in their perspective. People love to also talk about themselves. So if you ask someone, how did you get started in the industry? Boy, you'll see a light behind that person's eyes, and they'll say, oh, I was, just like you, and I started off this way, or they'll tell you a story about how they got started in the industry. And there you're making a personal relationship and connecting with that person. So that helps as well. Again, what type of projects excite them? One of my favorite questions is, what does a typical day look like? Again, here you'll get lots of different answers from different people, but it'll help you to paint an overall picture of what the job really is. Another good one, what skills do I need to be successful in this role? If you don't know that, or you're unsure, it's really important to ask that as well. What's the salary range for this position? It's curiosity, and it's making sure that you're mapping into something that's going to work for you. Additionally, learning and development opportunities and training, especially when you're coming into a new field, is really important. You know, what does the company offer? Do they offer a mentorship program? Do they offer a career development stipend where you can take different seminars or classes? Do you have goals you work on each year? Sort of, how do I learn and develop aside from just doing my job every day, so I can progress in my career? Talking about the next steps in the process is also important. So, you know, am I going to have 3 phone screens or virtual interviews and then am I going to come in, or am I just going to have one and I get hired? Like, how does it go? Every company's different, so a good thing to ask. And then also asking about the time frame for making a hiring decision. So some people might say, oh boy, we need somebody to start yesterday, and others may say, you know, we're taking our time, we're waiting for the right kind of person. So it's good to know, sort of from that perspective, from your perspective, the company's time frame as well. Next slide. Following up, something as simple as a thank you note really makes a difference. If you don't know how to contact the people, if they haven't given you an email address or you can't find it, go ahead and send it to the HR team and ask them to pass it along. They'd be happy to. Reiterate your interest in the position in the thank you note. Say why you think you're a match or a fit for the position. And then a nice thing I like is connecting on LinkedIn. I can't tell you how many people we've hired this year that we have spoken to last year or even the year before and who kept in touch with us. They are in the back of our minds, and even if we didn't have a position at that time, boy, when something came up, I mean, we sure have a lot of candidates applying, and there's a lot going on, but those that sort of keep in touch once in a while, periodically say, hey, you know, or say, hey, I saw this position, do you remember me? And kind of reach out, it really makes a difference. It makes you stand out. So a great thing to do. Next slide. And then the last thing is that virtual interviews are here to stay. It used to be that they were phone screens before. Typically, you would have a phone conversation before you went in to meet in person the team. Nowadays, it can be, depending on what kind of company you're talking to, it can be all the way a virtual interview. You might never even meet the person. You may never even go into the building, which is really weird, but it's happened. We have many employees right now who have never even set foot in our offices. So it's sort of a new way of being. And so be prepared with that. You know, what platform will you be connecting with? If you have never been on Zoom, you best, get on there and make yourself a profile and get yourself all set up. Or like today we're using RingCentral. Maybe that was a process for some of you. You might have had to download the software, things like that. Also, you may be prepared with it, say a week ahead of time. And then when you go to start the meeting, it'll say, oh, you have to do a download. It's going to take you 10 minutes. Well, if you aren't on that meeting early, the stress comes on and it just sort of starts off the interview. You'll be nervous on the other end. You'll be afraid. You'll be, afraid you're going to be late. And so test it out, on that day and make sure that there's no technical glitches that are going to slow you down. Also, make sure your sound settings works, although it's not a virtual meeting without somebody saying, can you hear me? Can you hear me? It's a little bit of fun, but not necessarily when you're starting an interview. Make sure your lighting is good, that it doesn't look like you're sitting sort of in a dark place. And then also be mindful of your background. What is showing behind you? Sometimes if you have an unmade bed in a messy room or something, that maybe it's not setting the, best tone. So there's always virtual backgrounds like I have on mine that you can add on, and that works great too, as long as it's nothing too distracting. And then try your best to look directly at the camera when you're talking. One nice thing about a virtual interview, especially if you're feeling nervous, is you can have another screen up with some of your talking points. And so is that cheating? No. Is that helping you along the way? Yes. Those are kind of things you can do for virtual interviews. So be yourself and you'll ace that interview.
Thank you so much, Nilofer.
Thanks.
That's great. Next, we'll have Moni Farhadi, Senior Facilities Planner at Stanford University. So a creative leader, Moni Farhadi experience spans 30 years of design, programming, and planning in education. Currently, Her role is Senior Facilities Planner at Stanford School of Medicine. There, she combines her passion for learning with collaboration skills to conduct various feasibility studies and build consensus. Money leadership role include former Board of Trustees, Los Gatos Union School District, Chair of Bond Oversight Committee, receiving Citizen Architect Award. Her intersectional advocacy is channeled through Women in Architecture Silicon Valley, as board member of NICA, Neosha International Conservatory of Art, and as co-founder of BB, Banus in the building industry. Moni?
Thank you so much, Mohammed. And along with the introductions, I'll also say that I am American Iranian, I am Muslim, my pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm also a mother of 2 adult sons who you'll hear me talk about quite often. So we did hear very nicely leading up to networking. We heard great tips on resumes and portfolio and the interview. And what I want to do is kind of demystify networking. Some of you might say networking's not for me. I don't know that many people. I'm shy. What's the big deal with networking? So it's really quite natural, and I hope to share some real life examples with you so that you can see how it can flow very naturally for you. Next slide. So where do we begin? Well, at a young age, you probably already were networking and you didn't even know it. How many of you performed in shows in school or played an instrument or were in chess club or scouting, right? So I want you to take a look back on your youth and those extracurricular activities that you did, because they matter, and reconnect with those. There were people throughout your youth who gave you a chance, who helped you. And I'll give you an example. Next slide. So here's a true story. Our older son was in shows throughout his elementary, middle school, and high school, and he'd go back and volunteer as he got older. Then a summer theater program was founded by his elementary school director. When my son turned 15, the director said, you know what, you've been volunteering here and doing community service hours, but I can pay you now because you're 15. So that's how our actor son got his first paying job as a teenager in the industry that he wanted to be in. And now he's getting his master's degree in Juilliard in acting. So it really does work for you to stay in touch with people who helped you in your childhood. I'll apologize on the slide. I did these in PowerPoint and it's showing in Google. So some of the formatting is a little bit wonky. Sorry about that. Next slide. All right, so now we're in college. In college also, I want you to join organizations, whether it's student government or service groups or clubs or sports teams. What is interesting to you? What is relevant to you? What is fascinating to you? It may have nothing to do with your career, but it's something you're interested in and something you enjoy doing and spending your time on aside from schoolwork. Did you play sports in school, right? So I want you to be able to reach out to your coaches, reach out to the parents of your teammates. And now I'll give you my second example from my son. Next slide. So our younger son played volleyball. So I have a right brain and a left brain, right? I got one who's more athletic and one who's kind of more engineering minded. So we got to know the coaches and the families at tournaments. And I started talking to them, say, hey, what do you do? You know, and then later on I would join them on LinkedIn, the parents I'm talking about. And I'll be honest, why? Because I can't remember where people work, but also people move around, right? So fast forward, now our son is in college. And he's looking for a summer internship in engineering and having a heck of a time. Nobody's responding. So I'm like, let me go on LinkedIn. And I searched, filtered for engineering. What do you know? 10 of the volleyball parents ended up fitting that match for engineering. So I reached out, messaged them. Hey, my son, remember he's looking for summer work. So because they knew him, every single one of the people I contacted replied. We got a 100% response rate. Even though they might have said, oh, we just hired. Or, oh, you know, we don't have an open position right now. It doesn't matter. We got a response 100%. There was one who replied. He's his old coach. He's now CEO of a startup. He said, you know what? I am looking for summer help. He introduced our son to the founder of the company. They interviewed, hired him, boom, like that. It really, really works. And now our son, this younger son, is starting his master's in electrical engineering at USC. So, sorry, proud mom here. Next slide. So professionally, what organizations can you join? As soon as you graduate, the second you graduate, you should join your professional organization. I did that. I joined the AIA in 1984, dating myself here. And I've been an associate member of AIA since 1984. That's a long time to be an associate member. Some firms will pay for your membership, as mine always did. And right now, my firm where I work at Stanford does not pay for membership, but it's a silver lining. Since I'm only an associate member, it's about $200 a year, so I pay for it out of pocket. But over the years, I've gotten to know so many people in other firms, and that has given me access and knowledge about what it's like to be in other firms, because people will talk to you about it. I've participated in exhibits or mentorships or done some study groups. Next slide, please. So I joined the WIA of Silicon Valley. Now, being in a group like this, we give each other advice and hope and encouragement. Through our networks, we lift each other up. In fact, my circle of WIA helped me navigate my career change. When I was interviewing, I asked my network, how much do directors make at your firm? And based on the information they gave back to me, I was able to jump 40% in pay. I'm not kidding you. I'm giving you real examples because it really does work. So next slide, please. You may want to join some affinity group. Maybe the AIA as a whole is too big or it's not quite the right match for you. So join a smaller committee. Find a group that you align with. If there isn't one, make one. So that's one of the reasons I co-founded the group BB, Banu's in the building industry. Banu is a Persian word for woman, and we are in the building industry. And this is for Iranian Americans, whether they're engineers, construction, architects, interior designers, it doesn't matter. We're all in the building industry. And we are helping each other with resumes and making introductions, giving each other career advice and boosting each other's confidence. Next, please. So along with the affinity, for example, I also attended a lot of Equity by Design conferences, and I've connected with them. And it makes me feel like I'm part of this movement, that I'm not on my own, that we can be a sea of change. And through that, I've met other women architecture groups or gender equity groups or other minority architect groups. And I'm following all these on Twitter or Instagram. And I came across, for example, Mothers in Architecture on Facebook. And I asked some other friends like Stephanie on the call. And we give advice to young working moms. Next, please. So maybe you have an interest area. You're interested in education projects or sustainability. That's another area. To find groups that align with you and areas of commonality. And why is that important? It gives you talking points. When you meet someone, if you have an area of commonality, it gives you some conversation starters, and then it won't be so awkward. It'll be easy to flow into a natural conversation because you're talking about something that interests you. And by bringing also what you learn from these other groups, you add value to your projects and you also will build expertise. Next, please. So one of the groups I joined was SCUP, Society for College and University Planning. And why? Because my area of interest is education planning. So for 30 years of working in architecture firms, my clients were always educational. So a group like SCUP brings together architects and education institutions, and there's programs and workshops, whether remote or in person. And that is how I met the Associate Dean of Stanford. I happened to be trying to marketing to him to hire our firm, but we bonded over ideas. We talked about family. Literally, why I share personal is because that is how people bond. You can talk about your personal story. And also, he had come to one of my presentations, so I had already built credibility with him. Eventually, he said to me, you know what, we're hiring a senior planner. Maybe you could recommend someone. I thought about it like, how about me? So I suggested myself, and the rest is history. I now work at Stanford. Next slide, please. These are real life examples. I'm not kidding you. Locally, all right, you do not have to go around the world to build your network. Right in your own backyard. You can build your network right locally. And in my own community, as I mentioned, I volunteered for my school district. Next slide, please. So this was the Los Gatos Union School District, where my kids went to school and grew up. And so this was an opportunity full circle. It allowed me to give back to my community. And I had already, like Nilüfer said, I had stayed in touch with all these teachers through the years, through Facebook, various things, right? So then I became their school board member, and we were still keeping the friendship. So I had my parent hat on, but I was also observing the learning environment. Because my clients were all education, I didn't go to school in the United States. I went to school in Iran. I don't know what it was like in the setting of public education in America, but by volunteering, I kind of put on my learning hat and I got to see how the learning environment works. And then I was able to give them some professional advice because I had worked with DSA or agencies that regulate schools. So I was able to draw on my experience. Also, this was an opportunity for leadership. It showed my firm that, hey, she's a community leader. And also it allowed a little bit of marketing while I was learning. Next, please. So what qualities should you be looking for when you're looking to align yourself? The same way as you align yourself with the firm you're looking for, the networking should also be aligned with you. You don't have to follow pop culture. Find what qualities you like. Does this group resonate with my values? Who do you want you to surround yourself with? What fascinates you, right? And then if you're looking for a specific person, you want to know, can this person give me critique? Or is this person going to be honest with me? And ultimately, you really want to connect with people who are authentic, who are going to be your champion. Next, please. So my last example, I'm going to go back to that first moment that I felt connected with a group of people. My parents were involved in the international architecture scene in Iran. My father was a rising architect, and my mother took me with her to attend this International Congress of Women Architects in the 70s, and I was a teenager. But guess what? I got to see Denise Scott Brown and Ann Ting, there they were, in Iran with Alison Smithson and Jane Drew and all these amazing global women architects. They were talking about creating equitable society, promoting sustainability and vernacular architecture. Well, I mean, it was, how could I not be who I am today by having gone to this experience as a teenager? I felt their camaraderie. They had come together. It was a call to action. They were going to make a change in the built environment. Next slide, please. So what are the advantages, right? So I've given you all these stories and examples about why we network. And I hope that that was valuable because I want to show you the real examples of it. I want you to encourage, look right in front of you for networking. Reach out to people from your own past, from your own present, your colleagues. If you want to start small, you can build your lattice, just network and LinkedIn connect with your colleagues. Slowly over time, it's going to strengthen and nurture you as you navigate your career. When you're looking for work, go through LinkedIn and see the firm that you want to work at, who in your network knows somebody there. Ask them to introduce you. All of these things are going to help you make it feel natural. And if you've surrounded yourself by people who are aligned with you, it's going to be much more authentic and you're going to help build your self-confidence. And the last slide. So I just want to say, again, as everyone else has said, do it with quality, not with quantity. Every encounter is an opportunity to build your web, whether it's someone in the grocery store, someone in a webinar. Just this morning, I attended a webinar. I messaged the speaker. Next thing you know, I'm on LinkedIn with the speaker of this webinar that I just listened to this morning. So I do actively connect, and it's part of my heritage, I must say. In our Eastern culture, we believe that the community matters more than the individual. So maybe that's why for me it's a passion, because I think of myself as part of a group. And I want to lastly say, together we are stronger, and together we can go farther. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Manny. That was great. Okay, now we are going to move to the second part of today's event, which is the breakout room, the workshops. So for the next 40 minutes, we'll be moving to breakout rooms. We'll have 4 breakout rooms. Each presenter will stay for 10 minutes in each breakout room before the next presenter move in. So I will actually stop the recording right now. I just want to make sure that you all are comfortable asking questions, as many of the presenters have been saying again and again. Ask questions, really. This is all for you. So ask all your questions, open your mic, your camera. You'll get, again, 10 minutes with each presenter, so make every second count. Let me stop the recording.